In this video, I'm going to be talking about trends in miniature painting. I think I've probably been in this hobby long enough that I can actually start to kind of identify some of them and kind of watch how they develop. And I think it's a really interesting topic to consider because I think trends have a very definite effect on the hobby as a whole. And I think some of them are positive and some of them are negative. But I'm going to try and get into both of those aspects in a little bit. So first of all, I kind of want to define what I mean by a trend in miniature painting. For me, it's any time you have a specific stylistic or technical development that is being utilized by a whole bunch of miniature painters, not just one or two, and you're going to be seeing kind of pictures of these things happening all over the place. And the other thing that I think defines trends, and that's of course true across the board, not just in miniature painting, is that they have a limited shelf life. So you'll see people doing these things a whole bunch for sort of a limited period of time, and then after that you'll see it some, but it won't be as big a deal anymore. A lot of these things, especially the stylistic or technical trends, are not things that objectively make the model better or make it easier to paint or something like this. They're just a specific way of doing things that produces a specific result, but it's not necessarily better or superior to various other ways of painting that same miniature. Okay, so let's get down to the nuts and bolts. What do I really mean by trends in wargaming? Let's talk about some concrete examples. Object source lighting and directional lighting in particular have been around for quite a while. People have been using those techniques now a lot, and they've gotten so popular they even really trickled down into painting wargaming armies, and that's when you know that it's really, really a big trend. But that also, unfortunately, means that they've been really kind of abused and overused, probably more than they really should be. You know, everybody has seen that sort of wargaming army, that sort of, say, squad of Space Marines, where they've been given sort of a dramatic treatment by taking an airbrush and then sort of spraying them from a specific direction with some color like, you know, blue or green or whatever to make it look like there's some sort of off-camera sort of mysterious light source affecting them, or maybe they're carrying a plasma weapon, right, and the whole area around the weapon is glowing and oversaturated. And don't get me wrong, this technique can be really cool and really effective, but and it is something I should point out that is particularly easy to do with an airbrush. So for people who've mastered that technique with the airbrush, it's a really easy way to add drama to figures, and perhaps too easy, because sometimes you'll see these models that this sort of wow lighting effect has become a crutch for otherwise kind of indifferent or even downright bad painting on the rest of the models. And then you've got something like atmospheric lighting, which is sort of a newer branch of this whole lighting effects trend. People have only fairly recently started to experiment with it, and you mostly see it only happening now on the larger scale figures. And like a lot of these technical trends, it's come directly from sort of inspiration in 2D art. So, you know, a great example of atmospheric lighting, say, is that, you know, you've got someone standing on the edge of a volcano or something, and the volcano is glowing and it's stuff, and there's some sense of drama or emotion. Maybe they're about to be shoved in, who knows? And, you know, so the whole face and body of the person is then painted exclusively in yellows and reds and oranges and colors that are given off by the volcano. And, you know, that's what I mean. The whole atmospheric lighting is using color specifically to convey a mood or express a sentiment, and doing it somewhat artificially. And it does work very well in 2D paintings, but I think that's the key. There's some of these techniques that don't seem to transfer as well into 3D works, and I think the atmospheric lighting is one of them. Again, I've seen some very, very effective and amazing examples of this being applied to 3D figures, but a lot of times I feel like it doesn't work and it's not as effective. When you've got a 2D piece, everything is self-contained. The problem is with a 3D object that otherwise exists in sort of sort of normal life, it is, and you want to apply those sort of extreme light, emotional lighting effects, it requires a certain suspension of disbelief by the viewer, and I think it's uncomfortable for people because of the fact that it exists in a space where those colors are otherwise not in evidence. So when I've seen atmospheric lighting being used well, it's usually done very, very subtly and very, very carefully on a model so as not to sort of overwhelm the whole piece, or it's presented in a very, very specific situation. I think atmospheric lighting, it's a very interesting thing, can be beautiful when done right, but it's so hard to execute well. And I think personally, my personal opinion of it is most of the time I would rather just see a model painted with sort of normal lighting conditions. One example of a stylistic trend that I've seen a long time in both the wargaming scale and with larger types of models is this sort of dark, high contrast style. It's sort of aiming, I think, to go for this sort of mysterious, brooding, kind of moody effect. So you have these really deep black shadows, lots of dark, vibrant colors, and proportionally not very many brights or high highlights on the models. It's most of what you're going to see is going to be dark or in deep shadows. And even when you do put more prominent highlights onto a model like this, the amount of contrast is still relatively low and fairly subtle. So you'll see then the models painted in this style are often spectacular looking in sort of studio photography conditions, especially against a black backdrop where, they're hit with some studio lights. They look really spectacular. The lights bring out all the sort of subtle nuance in the tones. But on the other hand, I've seen these same kind of models just sort of in sort of normal lighting conditions, and if you look at them just with the naked eye and sort of normal lighting, they don't look nearly as good in my experience. They just kind of look dark. They kind of look dingy. You can see if you look closely that they're very precisely and, carefully painted often because, there's still a lot of skill going into them. But there's no, just under the naked eye in normal light, the colors don't pop out. And they're just not nearly as spectacular. There's this sort of trend to paint models in this incredibly bright, colorful, almost oversaturated style. If anything, it's sort of the opposite of the sort of dark, brooding, high contrast type of painting I just described. This is like all the colors just are out there. They're like almost neon, bright, just completely over the top. They even, in some cases, even feel like an assault on the eyes, honestly. It's just kind of almost garish in some cases. It's not, again, it's well painted, but it's this very brilliant, colorful style that just is completely over the top, honestly. But you see it mostly with kind of limited, sort of these smaller sci-fi fantasy figures, and then not so much, or hardly at all, I think I've seen this on bigger models. Another thing that's kind of come out of the whole Games Workshop universe, I think, is the trend you see too to paint models in this really dingy, dirty, kind of weathered, diseased, kind of ruined looking way. And it makes sense to think that came out of Games Workshop because, of course, they've got their whole mythos with Nurgle and chaos and corruption. So that, it makes sense that people would want to paint models that way. And it's, again, one of those styles that if you're not careful, it can really turn into kind of a crutch or a way of compensating for kind of otherwise sloppy or kind of mediocre paint work. Okay, so in conclusion then, what do I think about trends in miniature painting? Well, like with everything else, there are good things and there are bad things about them. I guess to start with the bad things, to state the obvious, I think too many people following trends is always problematic because it means that create a decrease, I think, in creativity and originality because, everyone's just out there copying a certain style or technique instead of trying to think of their own techniques or styles or whatever. And, you know, that's really a shame, because I think the miniature painting hobby in general always benefits more when you've got as many different, very clearly unique viewpoints and styles, you know, out there in evidence. And that's way, way better, I think, and healthier for the community than when you just see a whole bunch of models that, as I said earlier on, can look like they were painted by the same person. And I think following from that, I think what may happen sometimes is some people, I think, make the mistake of assuming that things that are trends are somehow represent always a better way of doing things, as opposed to just representing a different way of doing things. And, you know, if you make that mistake and assume that everything that comes along, every trend is always, you know, this is now the best way to paint miniatures, which is not true, then I think that can really be problematic if you start falling into that way of thinking. Okay, so then what's good about trends? Well, first of all, I think they're a great way to sort of bring new styles and techniques to a broader audience. I mean, if we're just working in our own little bubble as painters, chances are there's a whole bunch of sort of ideas or ways of doing things that we're just not kind of going to think of on our own. So, you know, when these sort of really cool, interesting ideas come out, I think a lot of people get enthusiastic and copy them, because it just, you know, it's an innovation too in many ways, and people are excited and kind of eager about that. And I think, you know, trends often also lead to sort of this crowdsourcing phenomena almost, where you've got all these different people working basically on a style or a technique. And because you've got so many people working on it, you're going to really, I think, polish and refine that style or technique at a really fast rate. So the whole community kind of is figuring out together sort of the best way to approach that trend, you know, how to get the best results, how to do it the most efficiently, like sort of a whole bunch of sort of technical tips and tricks that, you know, are the most effective for getting the desired look. So in the end, you know, whoever originally came up with that specific idea, all these people are going to take that and really polish it and make it into something probably maybe better and more interesting and more effective than, you know, what it started out as. And also, of course, if you approach trends, I think, from, you know, a healthy, sort of balanced place, and you treat them kind of like a learning opportunity. So, you know, you try to emulate these styles or incorporate these techniques, not because you want to have your work exactly, you know, follow those particular trends, but because you want to, you know, learn kind of what's interesting and effective about them, and then incorporate that into your own sort of, you know, unique, distinct style. Then that's a really good thing. So, you know, you can benefit a whole lot from trends. They help you, I think, improve your painting. Okay, so now I want to hear what you guys think about trends in miniature painting. Do you think I'm right about this, or am I totally off base? If you do think trends exist, do you think they're good, bad, different from the hobby? Are there some significant ones that you think are worth mentioning that I missed out on here and didn't talk about? Whatever you think, leave it down below in the comments. I'll be really interested to read what you have to say, and, you know, hopefully some other people can also offer their feedback, and we can get a little bit of a discussion going. And of course, if you want to like this video, share it, or subscribe to my channel, that's also really appreciated and really helps me out. So again, I hope you found this video interesting and perhaps a little bit thought-provoking, and I will see you next time.